Good afternoon, students. I wanted to go over a few things with you. I finished grading the Module 2 stuff over the last 2 days, and I was grading your research topics. And I run into quite a few things that made me pause for a minute. The topics themselves were not so much an issue, it's some of the comments about it. In particular, I dealt with several that were with the Second Amendment, some of them dealing with communism. There's a few others that dealt with apartheid. But I wanted to harp on this for a minute. Not that there's anything wrong with these topics. I think they are topics we need to investigate, look into. It was the approach to doing this. If you recall, in Module 1, we had a little lesson on a bias. We looked at Howard Zinn and Larry Schweikart, which are two examples of very biased individuals. But I would also like to point out they both have PhDs, and they're very learned academics. Well, Zinn's case was. Many of you are looking at some of this research as trying to prove a point in the modern era. You're looking at, I want to do this to prove this. Okay, now at that point there, you are biased, and you are writing based on your personal opinion, judgment, feelings, or point of view, which if you look at the picture I have for you on the board here, you see that is the subjective meaning. It is your opinion. Okay, your opinion's valid. So is everyone else's opinion, who may agree with you, disagree with you, or not care which way they feel about this issue. Objectivity, which is the right-hand column here, objective information is factual based on observations and measurements. This is what we're going to do in this class, is use objective information. So before we can say Second Amendment good or bad, communism good or bad, apartheid good or bad, we need to look at the history of these topics and develop some of our opinions from what we find in the past. Whether gun control or gun rights are good or bad, again, that's your opinion. The problem is, if you go back to if you're going to do your research and you're saying, okay, the Second Amendment's the greatest thing since sliced bread, well, before sliced bread, actually. It's the greatest thing in the Constitution. Everybody should own guns. We need them to, so we can prevent tyranny of the government, so we can overthrow the Obama administration. Okay? I just saw this not too long ago. You know, it's only been about 3.5 years since Obama was president. All right, now I read the same thing, except for somebody saying the exact same words, except they take out Obama and they put in Trump administration. Now, I imagine that the two individuals would have wildly different opinions on what constitutes tyranny, and we can really go into some discussions. But at that point, we have left the objective world and we are looking at the subjective world. So let's look at, we want to go to objectivity on this. You are studying something, your topic, you're studying the topic, you're going back to the past. You're looking at the history. Before you can say good or bad about today, you need to understand the past. Let's just take the Second Amendment because we like this with the Constitution. Okay, well, the people that made the Constitution made the Second Amendment. Okay, that's false, right there on the right on the statement. Some of the people who drafted the Constitution took part in the drafting of the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights as a whole. All of them did. Example, Ben Franklin. He was dead. He took part in the drafting of the Constitution, but by the time they got around to the Bill of Rights part in 2 or 3 years later, actually 4 years before it was ratified, Ben Franklin passed away. So we need to realize that the people of the past did some things, and we have to look at the history. So we see that there was an era before the Constitution. Well, where was gun rights then? Did anybody even argue about gun rights? If you go back to before the Revolution, everybody talks about disarming the Patriots. I have news for everybody. The Patriots disarmed more of the Loyalists than anything else. So, and that is not a subjective fact. That is an objective fact backed up by the writings of the people who took guns away. We look at what we're going to study. We go back to this period before the Constitution. We need to explore it. Why is there going to be a Constitution? So I see Second Amendment backers and Second Amendment opponents. First of all, we have to realize that the Constitution has nothing to do with gun control or gun rights whatsoever. That comes later. That's in the Bill of Rights. That's something separate from the actual Constitution. So before anybody can sit there and say it's the greatest thing that they did and make through the Constitution, you have to realize it's not. It came afterward. And if it hadn't been for the ratification process, this Bill of Rights would never have existed in the first place. And then at that point, we go subjective because we don't know what would have happened. So I want you to focus on the actual past based on facts. And this is why primary sources are so important. Secondary sources. If I write one, you write one, we may have our opinions on the Second Amendment, communism, apartheid. That's fine. They're interpretations, but they will all contain a bias. Remember what I said. Anybody that says there's no bias is wrong. Everyone has a bias because it is shaped by your life experiences. People who disagree with that are missing the point because the objective truth speaks volumes about that subject. You need to study the past to understand why things occurred, and then you can start moving up the line, the timelines to today's world. Now, some of you, we were talking about gun control. I told you most of it is an ideological issue in today's world, which is exactly my opinion on that. Objective means I need to go back to the past to study why there's a Second Amendment. Okay, and that's what I want you to do. But the problem that many of you are having, and I'm not just saying Second Amendment, this is also on the Constitution. I see this all the time. The Constitution is great. It's the greatest thing since the world's been created. Okay, if it's the greatest thing since the world's been created, why don't all nations use the Constitution? There's many have, but they didn't take the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. They changed it to fit their nations and their peoples. So we need to start thinking objectively about this research. If we go back looking at, like, I'm here to prove that the Second Amendment is the greatest thing in the world, you're not going to have objective research. You're going to have subjective research. You're going to disqualify any information that does not support your desired outcome. That is biased, it is subjective, and it isn't worth a bucket of warm spit. We've got plenty of that. Turn on the internet, take a good look, flip on Facebook, go to Twitter, hop on a Reddit page. We've got plenty of subjective stuff out there. We need objective information. And as I tell my students at community college, we've got enough problem creators in this world. We need problem solvers. And to use critical thinking to solve problems, you need objective data. So that's what you're going to do. You need to start thinking differently. Now, in the announcement that you're going to get in the morning, something called Thinking Historically. It is a little video blurb that's in the announcement. These announcements, I take time, I put them together. I can tell who's reading them and who's not. I can tell who's watching the videos or not because these things get tracked. So do yourself a favor. Sit down, think about what you're doing. The key operative word here is think. Am I being subjective or am I being objective? Now, to think about that, I've got some websites, and I'll be working them into the discussion post this week. We have differences when we talk about subjective and objective. We're being bombarded with facts and figures, opinions and projections. You, I, everybody. Politics, advertising, on and on about all kinds of things. And just forget the Constitution or communism or any of this political stuff. Teams, which sports to watch, what shows to watch on TV, what's the hip fashions. All these things are things we run into all the time. So we have to create order of these divisions to find out patterns to help us understand what is true, what could be true, and what is outright false. We need to have a grip on what's objective and what's subjective. Objective is a statement that is completely unbiased. It is not touched by the speaker's previous experiences of taste. It is verifiable by looking at facts and performing mathematical calculations. Subjective, on the other hand, is a statement that's been colored by the character of the speaker or the writer. It often has a basis in reality, but reflects the perspective through which the speaker views reality. It cannot be verified using concrete facts and figures. And we often do this. We often use our opinions. That's part of who we are. But again, it's driven by our life experiences, which shows the bias that we have. But objectivity that everybody wants, it's much harder to do. And that's what we're trying to train you, teach you to stop thinking subjectively as much as we can and to start thinking objectively. It's different. It takes work. It takes conscious thought. That's what we need you to do. Objective. It is important to be objective when you're making any kind of rational decision. It might involve purchasing something or deciding which job offer to take. You should also be objective when you are reading, especially of news sources. Being objective when you are meeting and having discussions with new people helps you to keep your concentration focused on your goal, rather than on any emotions your meeting might trigger. Subjective can be used when nothing tangible is at stake. When you're watching a movie or reading a book for pleasure, being subjective and being caught up in the world of your characters makes the experience more enjoyable. If you're discussing any type of art, you have to keep in mind that everyone's opinions on a particular piece are subjective. I see this when I play Pathfinder. I have a particular viewpoint. It's subjective. It's fine. That's the world we have with that. That's what it's supposed to be. But when we study history, I can't change the past, and neither can you. I gotta stop projecting what I want the past to be, and instead let the past guide my opinions of today. There's a reason why many historians have opinions that they have. What are those opinions? Why do they have them? I want to remind you that many historians have spent 4 years picking up a bachelor's degree, another year or two, maybe 3 years picking up a master's degree, and then maybe 3 or 4 more picking up a doctorate degree. Most of them have 10 years of academic work before they reach that point. It's not easy. Only about 1.5% of the people in America have a doctor's degree. And it runs the gamut of their political ideology, of course. But it's not like it's these people just come down the street with just opinions and just pick up a degree. It doesn't happen that way. So that's what I wanted to cover with this lesson. Excuse me. Every time I talk a lot, I get dry-winded. So this is what I wanted to cover up this little video right here. Look at our screen, the subjective versus objective. Stop and think about what you're doing. It's not that I don't like your subjects. They need to be looked at. The Second Amendment in the past is wonderful. It's great. I have looked at it. There's pros and cons to all of this stuff. And it help guide us into today. But if we go back with our opinion fixed, and nothing we study in the past is going to change your opinion, then we don't have an objective interpretation. We have a subjective, biased interpretation, and it will show. And the problem I have right now is we have too much of that and not enough objective information, mainly because people, they want that emotional deal. Whenever you see a piece of information that elicits an emotional response that are written in the modern era, they're doing that on purpose to get you or to make you do something, to elicit that emotional response. They're telling you what you want to hear or what you don't want to hear. That's not what you're supposed to be doing when you make decisions about certain things. You're supposed to be doing it objectively, using the facts. And you'll notice real quick in the subjective, there's half a fact or no fact. People say there's problems with the media. There's no problems with the media. There's problems with the people reading the media or watching it. You don't think. Notice I didn't say either side on that. It's everywhere. Think. All right, that's it for this one here. I want you to go look at your topics. Notice I didn't grade on the subjectivity or anything like that. Your topics, think what you're going to do. You've all got a good start, okay? So what you're going to do is start thinking objectively. You're going to find things you don't agree with in the past. It's all right. You're not, the past happened for its reasons. The people of the past made decisions for their reasons, not for yours. I think that's probably the biggest thing I find with the Constitution is that the people who wrote it weren't really worried about the people 200 years later. They were concerned about the world that they lived in. That's what they did. They wrote it for themselves and the world they lived in. Jefferson even commented about that, saying they should write a new constitution every generation. Madison was appalled at that idea because it took so much work to write the constitution they had. And the people who framed the Constitution knew that there would be to be changes to it. And that's one of the problems they had with the English Constitution. So in the written American Constitution, they put in an amendment process. They made it difficult to change, but they made it where if it needed to be changed, it could be changed. That's interesting. All right. Again, that's it for this one here. Objectivity versus subjectivity. We're going to talk about that in the forums this week. That's why I'm going to plug this in right now into the announcements, and we'll go from there. All right. Have a good one, gang.